Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So today we're going to talk about the legacy of lending libraries in Islamic history. And the reason we're doing this is because we've been working on something called Burooj Library, which is trying to revive that spirit of libraries in Islam. And I'll talk more about kind of how they came about, what happened to them, what's kind of happening now, and how we're trying to revive them, inshallah. So, why do libraries matter? So, the first word I'm sure we've heard is that was revealed in the Quran is Iqra, right, which means to recite or to read, right? And the Muslims, the way we've preserved our knowledge is through books, through oral tradition, and just kind of having that knowledge spread and disseminate. That's the way it happens. So that's why Muslims were one of the first civilizations to really codify a lot of this. So there was the Chinese civilization and the Islamic civilization before the printing press. And kind of a fun fact about that is that Gutenberg, the man who is known from Germany who invented the printing press, he actually took a lot of the same ways that people were using ink in both Chinese and Islamic history back in the Golden Age, and then he used that to actually create the printing press. So a lot of the work that the Muslims were doing beforehand was actually what led to the printing press being invented, alhamdulillah, right? So libraries are also a place where it brings community together, right? So you can come in, you can read, but you can also have people have meetups, people come together, they learn. Ben Franklin was famous for having these groups where they'd get together every Friday and just kind of talk different topics. And so and they'd always talk and read books, almost like a modern book club. And then other libraries, some have memberships. So if you have a membership, then you put your trust, right? Because you're going to be lending and taking books. The idea is that you need to kind of have some way to verify yourself. So there was ideas of membership. There was even sometimes the sheikh of a student would have to sign off that this is my student before he could even take a book outside of the library. And again, it's a historical significance, right? So we're going to talk about a lot of the libraries that the Muslims and the Imam had in the past too, alhamdulillah. So the Muslim world was kind of the center of knowledge, the center of the Muslim world was actually books, right? So they were the hubs of research, of innovation, cultural exchange. And so there's some key figures I want to talk about, especially in the time of the Abbasid Empire. So the Khalifa Harun al-Rashid he started collecting books. And because he had his own book collection, and some say it was actually Al-Mansur, which is his great-grandfather, they would collect their own books in their palaces. And what would happen is, eventually it got so large that they said, we should share this. And so they started something called Bayt al-Hikmah, right, the House of Wisdom. And the House of Wisdom is the place where there was the big library in Baghdad, in Iraq. And so he began collecting the books, and that laid the foundation for Bayt al-Hikmah. And so his son, the Khalifa al-Ma'mun al-Rashid, was actually the one who expanded it into like a world-class institution. That people from all over the world would come, people from Europe and China and kind of all over would come and basically learn, right? Because this was where the center of knowledge was. And he was a big part of that. And there was certain people that were. It's crazy because now when you think today, you think of a librarian. You don't think of a person who is like a scientist or a PhD. You don't see them as librarians, but that's kind of who were the librarians back in the past. Subhanallah, right? So Al-Khwarizmi is the father of algebra, right? So he's the one who basically created algebra. He was one of the first people to codify the Hindu Arabic numerals, and because of him, we now have those numbers that everyone uses, 0 through the 10, 0 through 9 system. And the way we write it is in that Hindu and Arabic way. So he's the one who codified that, and he actually was a employee of Al-Ma'mun al-Rashid, right? And so he worked at Bayt al-Hikmah, like that was his actual office and where he was doing his work. So it's pretty amazing that how again. Look at the people just 100 years ago. Like, look at the Nobel Prize and who wins them, and they're from certain areas. There's like in Germany and Hungary and like certain areas, and especially 100 years ago, a lot of these scientists, especially there's a lot of Jews that were scientists because they had a culture of learning, of research and that type of thing. So like Albert Einstein, he was Jewish himself, the father of the atomic bomb, right? The movie that everyone watched. What's it called? Christopher Nolan's movie. Uh, Oh, Oppenheimer. Thank you, Oppenheimer. So these people are all like just like world-class physicians, world-class physicists, chemists, etc. So like they kind of had what we had as Muslims, about 1,000 years prior, right? So Al-Khawarizmi came from Bayt al-Hikmah, right? So without Bayt al-Hikmah, if you think about it, like there's no Al-Khawarizmi. Without no Al-Khawarizmi, there's no algebra. There's no like math kind of as a subject is not developed the way it was. Next is Al-Kindi. Al-Kindi died about 20 years after Al-Khawarizmi. He died in about 850. Al-Kindi died in about 870, 873. He was known as the philosopher of the Arabs. So he was writing books on philosophy. Again, he also worked at Bayt al-Hikmah, subhanAllah, right? He wrote about philosophy, mathematics, medicine, and even optics. So the knowledge that we have on our eyes, and a lot of us wear glasses and laser surgery and these type of things, he was the one kind of codifying that, again, in around 800 AD. SubhanAllah, right? 870 AD. He also was the one who translated a lot of the Greek texts. His job, but Al-Ma'mun Rashid actually told him, your job is to take the Greek texts from Aristotle and Socrates and these other ones and translate them, because he knew Greek, into Arabic. And so he actually translated those books in Bayt al-Hikmah. And again, what's amazing, because we're so spoiled with the printing press, and if you want to write a book, you just write it on your Google Docs, and then you just print it, and you're just good to go. I mean, there were actually hundreds of employees in Bayt al-Hikmah that would write by hand each of the books and make copies of it over and over again, right? And that's why, like, having a system when lending was so important, because it took, if you steal one book, I mean, the value of a book back then was hundreds of hours of writing, right? Versus today, it's a lot different, subhanAllah, right? And the last one I want to talk about in kind of the whole idea of a library was Al-Razi. Al-Razi was also a philosopher and a physician. So he pioneered medical ethics and hospital treatments that he had. And they call him the father of pediatrics, right? So like pediatric medicine for children, he was actually the one who went in there. And he was the one who pioneered experimental medicine, which maybe is a little controversial, but it's the idea of, like, let's actually test something, on humans or rats or whatever it is, and then let's see if it works, and if it doesn't work, we kind of iterate on it. So he's building that iteration there. He's also one of the first human beings to distinguish between measles and smallpox. And I found that very fascinating because, I mean, look at us. Like, we have all the technology and everything today, but even myself, can I do that, right? But subhanAllah, they had very little technology the way we have it, and subhanAllah, how much wisdom and how much work they put in to learn about things like measles and smallpox. Even to me, is like, oh, that sounds like the same thing to me. But subhanAllah, they see it as, like, he actually saw it as these are actually two separate strains of virus and everything like that. SubhanAllah, right? So it's amazing because nowadays we have libraries, Library of Congress, and then different libraries in different cities. But I mean, this was a place, if you came in here, you had access to like some of the best mathematicians, physicians, just like every subject, right? Even the scholars, the ulama in Islam, were all there, like in Bayt al-Hikmah, right? So if you're going to a library, you're actually going to they would have madrasa there, the masjid was there, like the whole city was kind of built around that area, subhanAllah, right? So it's kind of like a super library, right? Which is amazing. So I had poetry, like the doctors, everyone was kind of there. And so, they say that like one of the biggest networks you can build is, being around people. If you're around people of a certain, way of thinking, then you'll start thinking like them. And subhanAllah, what they did was that's how much knowledge was disseminated in such a short period of time from the Muslims, because they were able to all come together, right? Like Al-Razi was with Al-Kindi, they were with each other, right? SubhanAllah. And then if you were just the awam, the regular person coming in, you could actually go in and talk to them and learn from them, on top of learning from the books that they had written. So like the authors were almost there, like doing a book signing every day, SubhanAllah. And the way people would do it is, they would come for salah, so salat al-asr, salat al-dhuhr, maghrib, isha, whichever it was, and they would stay at the masjid and be like, I got time between asr and maghrib, let me go to the library, read a book, get some coffee, whatever it is, and then I'll come back and pray at maghrib. So it became like a community, like, there's the idea of a community center that we use today, mashallah, like especially like, in this masjid, so it's an amazing place that we have more than just, we have events on top of the salah. I mean, they were doing this almost like, 1,000 years ago, alhamdulillah. So Bayt al-Hikmah is kind of the most famous and the biggest and the kind of the first one, right? And again, there's the argument that's one of the first libraries in history, right? And so they had thousands and thousands of books, and all handwritten. Every single book was hand inked and handwritten. SubhanAllah. They made copies of them. And unfortunately, it was destroyed in the Mongol Invasion in 1258. We'll talk a little bit more about that. There was also Darul Uloom in Qahira, in Cairo. So the Fatimid dynasty actually had a library themselves. This was a few hundred years after, and they had about 100,000 volumes. And it was totally public. And then when the Fatimid dynasty was declining, unfortunately, the library usually got destroyed also. Then there was also the Umayyad library in Cordoba in Spain, right? And so they had over 400,000 books, subhanAllah. So you're able to read kind of everything from Greek to Renaissance texts to Arabic texts, kind of everything was there, right? So it actually inspired the Renaissance, right? So the Muslims had so much more impact on the way the world works today than most of us could kind of give credit for. Even us as Muslims, like how much do we learn about this, right? And then Darul Kutub, which is also in Qahira and Cairo, this is actually it was founded in 1870 by Ismail Pasha, who was the governor of the Ottoman Empire in Egypt at the time, right, in Misr, right? And he founded it in 1870, and alhamdulillah, it's actually still alive today. So that library is still, it's a national library of Egypt, right? And you can actually go visit it today. And so it's the idea of like Muslims had this like the strength in knowledge, right? And that was like our sunnah, the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but also the sunnah of our pious predecessors was knowledge, right? And how can we share that knowledge and keep it and disseminate it? And like we talked about before, they were actually tied to masajid, right? And so one of the things, with Burooj, I'll talk about, one of our ideas was, like, instead of us building a library in, another building in a separate area, why not actually work with our masajid, right? And build a place where we can build a community where people love to read, right? Reading is there was an article recently of reading is the lost art, and like nobody reads anymore. And then everyone's response to the article was like, duh, like people, astaghfirullah, that's just the way it is. All of us consume, social media or whatever. We read online like articles, but we don't, like, how many of us sit down with like an actual physical book, right? And now we have Kindles and things like that, right? But the masjid itself, like you build a you build a community, you build kind of a culture of reading when you just have books, right? So one of my teachers taught me a long time ago. If you go to any ulama's house, like go to any of their houses, go to any of their areas, their offices, and you'll just see books everywhere. MashaAllah. It's like, almost like universal. I've never met an alim that doesn't have that, right? And he told me, he's like, just put books around you. Just surround yourself with books in your house. And then when you go in there, like when you're bored, you're gonna see them all the time. What happens when you see them? You're gonna be curious and you start looking at it. In fact, Bill Gates is famous for having libraries in his house, right? Because that's, again, one of the signs. They know this. The non-Muslims know that how to win in life, right? It's seek knowledge, and one of the beauties of reading is that you can actually it's almost like doing suhbah, and it's like the closest thing to suhbah of someone who's passed away, right? Is you sit in their company, right? I remember the first time I read one of Imam Ghazali's books, The Path of Sufism. I read that book. It's as if I was sitting with them, and it honestly was a hard read because, mashallah, he was just, the things he was saying, I was like, oh my God, the Muslims of today can't do this. But as reading it, it was as if he's like, this is what you need to do in order to succeed. Allahu Akbar. And it was amazing to read, like, this was written 1,000 years ago, and we were able to kind of to see a little bit of how his brain works. It's amazing, right? Mashallah. So books are just such a beautiful thing. It actually takes you into the mind of the author, right? And they also not only had books at the libraries, they also had like open debates where they would say, hey, come, we're going to have a debate on this topic, and so these two ulama or whoever it is are going to come, and it would attract a crowd of people, right? People would come in the library, right? And they also had, like, if they were having student gatherings, or maybe there's a halaqah or something, they would actually usually do it at the library, at the Beit al-Hikmah. That was the space where they used for school, basically. So it became like, and then it became lending, right? So first was a library. You come here, you would just read it yourself, and then you'd be done. You have to go home, unfortunately. But a lot of times they said, hey, they noticed that, hey, we want to take this home. Like, this is a long book. I can't just read it in 1 hour or 2 hours when I'm here. And so they built a trust-based learning system, right? So there wasn't any barcodes. There wasn't any like fancy library cards or anything like that back then. But they basically built it on trust. So because they knew who was coming in, and they didn't even write it down, right? They just know that, okay, this person's here. brother X is brother, sister Y is here, and because they're coming, that trust-based system was enough to trust the Muslims, right? And sometimes a lot of people the reason they took the books home is because they wanted to copy it for themselves, right? And in order to copy it, you have to start writing it, every page by hand. And so they would just start taking it and maybe doing it after 30 days or however long it took. And they also, the idea of endowments or a waqf, which I know MCC has talked about, mashallah, a lot. But that was how books were donated. The money that came in from the investments they would use to purchase books, because they knew that the value of almost like an investment into yourself or into the community is to give them books to read, right? So they saw the value of it, and they said that, hey, look, we won't close this down. It will always be open to the public, right? It's not some private shelf for like some private rich person or some khalifa or some wazir or anything like that. It was actually for the entire. Everyone was allowed and actually encouraged to come. And sometimes, again, if they didn't know you in the community, like I mentioned before, the student would have to go and get like almost like a permission slip from his teacher, or the sheikh would have to come in and say, no, I can vouch for fulan ibn fulan, right? This so-and-so person, he's one of my students. And so it's almost like, when you have someone kind of sign on your behalf when you're trying to get a loan or anything like that, right? So it's almost like, hey, don't worry, I can back him, basically, right? And so the libraries also kind of led to kind of these book markets, right? Because they realized that not only can we lend these books and get knowledge that way, you also can sell them because people want to buy them, and it takes a lot of work, like we talked about, to recopy them. And so again, the Khalifa Muawiyah, who was the son of Harun al-Rashid, he is actually one who founded the first library in Damascus, right? And so it was a smaller library, but then they also built vibrant book markets. So you can see, in the picture that not only was there, usually when you go to a bazaar or you see food and you see like like tapestries or like rugs and chairs and those type of things, but they started also having books, right? And nowadays, has anyone been to like Carmel Mall in Somalia or in Little Mogadishu, they call it, in Minnesota, right? You go in there, mashallah, it's like they call it a Somali mall. You go in there and it's as if you go into like a regular market. You're walking in Marrakesh in Morocco, or in India or Pakistan, Bangladesh, anywhere you're from, Afghanistan, and you go in there and they just have like these small booths, and like a lot of the sisters will be selling clothing, and the men will be selling oud, but nowadays they also have books there. Now they have a ton of stores that are just dedicated to books, because they realize that there's value in that. Alhamdulillah. And Ibn Battuta, right? So those of you who don't know who he was basically the Marco Polo of Muslims, right? He traveled from, al-Maghrib to al-Mashriq. He went from like Morocco all the way to China, right? And even Indonesia. He went all the way and traveled by foot and then came back. And in his travels, he accounts for that book bazaars. He called it the center of culture, right? So if you have what you see, that you can actually see what people find interesting in their communities, what people find valuable in their communities, right? When he goes to China, he's looking at something very different than when he's going to Baghdad, for example, because they're going to have very, very different. Then you go to Europe and you'll see totally different things there. So, like I said, it started in the 9th century, right? And so they started expanding. So they went to the big cities of the Muslim world. So you had Basra in Iraq also, right? You have Damascus in Syria, and you have Cairo. They built public libraries. Even a lot of the governors and a lot of the people of wealth had their own private libraries, and even though the word you have the word private, it actually they'd actually open it to the public. They'd say, "Come check out my library." Just like I watched a random video the other day, and like Jay Leno is known, for example, for having a lot of cars, and he likes to show it off. That's just like his personality. And so he actually opens his garage to people and say, "Come look at my car collection," right? And so that was what the Muslims would, the wealthy Muslims would do the same thing, but with books. They say, "Come check out my library, see the books that I have, and come read with me," right? And then these wealthy rulers and these citizens would actually sponsor these collections, and that's how the libraries were actually sponsored by the wealthy and the khulafa and the rulers, because they saw the value in it, right? And so that's why they put a ton of work and things like that into that. And then also there's something called Kitab al-Fihrist, which was like the first cataloging of books. Right? So now think about everyone, especially if those of you who were born in the U.S. or you went to the U.S. school system, you know that the way libraries are usually organized is by the Dewey Decimal System, right? And so there's a man that, he codified, I think it was about 100 years ago, I can't remember. He codified the way we organize books, because I mean, when you have books of 1,000, 100,000 in a library, it's very hard to find, right? And so the first way to catalog books was actually Kitab al-Fihrist. So there was a person who was actually in charge of putting it in, right? So his name is Ibn Nadim. So he's actually known as a master bibliographer. So a bibliographer is someone who organizes books, right? It doesn't explain how he does it necessarily, so we don't necessarily know how he did it, but he was able to, again, just like the Dewey Decimal System would put it by author's last name and by section, so you'd have like, fantasy, and then you'd have A through Z, then you have science fiction, A through Z, history, A through Z, like that. So he had his own system he developed. And he was he also developed this around the time of the Abbasid Empire, right? And so think about it, like a medieval Google. Like Google is actually, they call it like indexing. So he was like one of the first people to index books, right? SubhanAllah. And so a lot of the Muslim world, a lot of the human world has the Muslims to thank for a lot of this, because we set a lot of the sparks for what the modern way of doing things is, right? The modern library is actually built off of how the Muslims did it during the Golden Age. So unfortunately, the Golden Ages don't last, right? And so what happened was, one of the ways that if you look at like throughout Islamic history, kind of what happened to Muslims, they realized, like the non-Muslims realized, in order to put the Muslims down, we got to take their knowledge away from them, right? And that's why they were destroying these books, right? And especially the Mongol invasion in 1258, it was one of the worst invasions of human history, right? I believe it was Genghis Khan who came in and actually slaughtered Baghdad, right? And they said that there was so much blood on the floor and so much death that it was up to their knees in blood, almost, subhanAllah, right? May Allah grant all of them martyrdom and then shuhada, make them all shuhada. And the irony of it is, I mean, as those of you who have studied history, the irony of the Mongol invasion is those are the same people that became Muslim, right? And it took, and I think actually a lot of today's world, the way we're living today, the way the Muslims are, we don't have the power anymore. We feel like we're in Makkah again, like as Rasulullah ﷺ was in Makkah, but it was almost through your character, you just changed the state of the human race. And that's exactly what happened to the Tartars and the Mongols, right? The Muslims just lived under it as subjects, and then the Mongols are like, man, these people have amazing character, they have amazing ways of life, they have a great family system, everything is amazing, and then subhanAllah, they just took over. Allahu Akbar. But one of the kind of what we lost in history was all those books, right? All those books in Bayt al-Hikmah, it was destroyed, right? It was absolutely ransacked. They were all burned. And even, again, like the Fatimid dynasty and all these books that they had were pretty much all destroyed. But and obviously the Crusades was a huge part of that also, because they came in, the Christians came in, and one of the things they did was destroy. And one of the things, mashallah, the Muslims did was whenever we came and conquered, we actually rebuilt the church. Umar was famous for rebuilding the church in Jerusalem, right? When they destroyed it, right? There's also I believe a weak hadith of the Prophet doing the same thing in Medina, right? I believe it was a synagogue or a small place of worship for the Jews that was destroyed, and he rebuilt it. Weak hadith, but still, like the point stands, right? And so do you see it, like the way the enemies of Islam were coming at it was they knew that in order to destroy these people and lose their hope, let's actually get rid of their knowledge, right? And so they would steal, there's fires that are happening, and then that actually, because it built a culture of Muslims to not love the knowledge the way they used to, we as Muslims ended up neglecting our libraries and our places of knowledge, right? And so over time, and this doesn't happen over a 5-10 year period. It happens over a millennium sometimes, right, or dozens of years. And so because that diminished, we kind of lost manuscripts. We lost a lot of knowledge, and that's kind of what happened. And so that's why we don't have the library culture that we had, about 800 years ago. Like, doesn't really seem to happen anymore in the Muslim world anymore. But I mean, the legacy is there, right? And there's actually a lot of hope. Right, seeing what the Muslims have done in the last like 5 years or last 10 years, right? I mean, we haven't had a Khalifa in over 100 years, right? And subhanAllah, how we've stayed steadfast throughout this, I think there's a lot of hope, right? So number one is like learning from the legacy of our pious predecessors, right? By knowing that the value of safeguarding classical wisdom and classical knowledge is so important, and not only from Islam or even like Deen matters, but also from ancient cultures, right? like knowing, again, reading about Aristotle or Socrates is amazing, but also learning about Alexander the Great and Caesar and these other people, it's important for us as Muslims or just humans to know. It actually, what do they say that it's that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, right? So learning how to, knowing how to, learning from these people, good or bad, to influential people, helps us actually become better people. Knowing what mistakes they made, how we can kind of learn from those, right? And the beauty is we can learn, and again, the Muslims of the past knew that we can learn from both Muslims and non-Muslims, right? So if anyone knows, like how do we know, like let's say Qasasuna Anbiya by Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, right? How did he know these stories of Dhul Kifl alayhi salam, or how do you know the story of Ilyas alayhi salam? Because there's very little mention about them in the Quran, right? And so the way he learned from them was through the concept of Israeliyat, right? Israeliyat is learning from basically the Christians and the Jews, the people of the Ahl al-Kitab, right? And they had their scholars, right? They also had the Bible, and reading in the Bible in a way that, okay, we take from where there's benefit, but anything that is clearly falsehood, we reject, right? We reject the story of Lut alayhi salam being seduced by his daughters, right? We totally reject all of these claims, right? And others that they have in the Bible, in the modern Bible. But there are others that we actually learn from. And so, again, learning from not only from Muslims, but also the non-Muslims is super important. And it's amazing how this actually helped spark the European Renaissance. The Renaissance was filled with knowledge. I mean, in like a 100-year period, you had Leonardo da Vinci and Isaac Newton and these people kind of coming in, Michelangelo. They all came in the European Renaissance around the 1400s, right? It's the joke it's funny for me because when we studied history, right, in the U.S. or in the West, the way that we study history is, there's you go in the Babylonians back in the day, and then it goes into Greek and then Roman empires. Then there's like this gap for 700 years. Like that nothing happens apparently for 700-800 years, and then all of a sudden there's the European Renaissance, right? They skipped the whole Islamic Golden Age, right? Which is actually what led to the Renaissance. That's when they were in the Dark Ages. They don't talk about that, right? Where they had plagues and different things, right? Christopher Columbus also came in around the Renaissance, right? And so that was the foundation that actually sparked the movement. A lot of them went to Egypt and different areas in the Middle East to learn. Right? I mean, like Alexander the Great is famous for conquering. He went from the Eastern European area all the way to the east in Asia. And what's funny is if you study like Napoleon or Caesar or a lot of these other leaders, even like the Tsar Nicholas, and their goal was actually to copy Alexander the Great. That was actually their goal, right? I believe when Caesar was around the same age that Alexander the Great died, I believe he was 33, 34 years old. When he was the same age, he went to the statue of him in town, and he's like, I haven't accomplished anything. I'm not even close to you, Alexander. And that was when he was just a common man. He ended up becoming the Caesar, 10 years later. But once they did that, they realized they all wanted to conquer Egypt. And that's what Alexandria is named after, Alexander the Great, right? And then Caesar comes, and he actually, if you know the story of Caesar, he also attacks Alexandria and makes it part of the Roman Empire, and he marries Cleopatra, and he has a kid with her, right? And there was actually a whole issue about who was his successor. Napoleon, subhanAllah, thousands of years later, was obsessed with Alexander the Great and Caesar, and he did the same thing. He actually went to Egypt. He conquered Egypt, Alexandria, right? There's the famous, if everyone's seen the famous picture of Napoleon with the Sphinx. Right? That because he worshipped that, right? But the reason like Caesar and them did that was actually because they saw the knowledge, right? And that's why like the people of Europe actually went into the Middle Eastern area, North Africa, and Asia to learn, right? And they saw there was value by going in there, subhanAllah, right? And this lasting legacy that Muslims have brought actually ties into what we have today. So today we have a library system that's, our libraries are a public library that's actually paid for by our taxes by the government, right? Alhamdulillah, it's a beautiful thing, right? Unfortunately, our culture is not a culture where its libraries are full, right? Like maybe like they used to be, but it's still an amazing thing that we have, like that we have a government that pays for our parks, right? It's all free. We don't have to pay a $20 fee or anything to get into a park, and also to a library. And I mean, come see some of these libraries that they've built in just the Bay Area, right? Like the new Hayward Library is so beautiful. It looks like a college campus. Right, and it's all paid for it's all free, right? You can go in and check out books and things like that. So they've actually, they've taken a lot of what we've built as Muslims, and now they've adapted it to the modern age. So what does that mean for us today, right? So we kind of had that same vision at Burooj, right? So my wife and I, okay, I'll give all credit where it's due, my wife, right? And I'm kind of here playing along for the ride. But we basically realized that we would go to libraries and we would see that, unfortunately, you'd see things that are not necessarily Islamic, right? We saw a picture, one time we were at a library, in the kids section, and we saw a woman wearing a hijab kissing a woman. Astaghfirullah, right? That's what we were seeing in the libraries. And so we thought that's not even a safe place for our kids anymore. Like we wish, even if we had our own section, whatever it is, we can't even go there anymore, right? And then we thought, like, what's the history, or what are we doing as a community? We need to start. We need to make knowledge fun. Make knowledge, like, that should be what we're aspiring to, right? It's so inspiring to hear that, when you hear that, hey, the only people left on earth that have a nuclear family unit are Muslims. They're the ones saving us from this kind of this craziness that the world is going through. And I think Joe Rogan on his podcast, he was so amazed when he saw that they were like, when you go down the streets of New York City, I always will see a man or a woman just like in the middle, like he's just in the middle of the street, and he's just like, oh my God, I have to pray. He puts something down and he starts praying. This is Joe Rogan, and he's like, how can you do anything against these people? They have such structure in their life that they just stop everything and they pray. And then he was also amazed when he saw Makkah, pictures of Makkah and videos. And he saw that, like, the people would come around and go around the Kaaba. And when it's time to pray, he's like, everyone bends in unison, right? And when people say Muslims are not united, okay, fine, you can argue that. But what I will say is, look at the whole. Like, we have the choice, and we actually can do it. We have done it. Just come if those of you who are here for Jum'ah or any Salah. Like, everyone is praying. Hundreds of people, women and men, are praying together, all in the same unit. When the Imam says Allahu Akbar, goes to ruku', we all come down with him. Everyone. Nobody's like, I'm going to do sajda instead, right? Everyone, we're united on it. Allahu Akbar, right? And so that was kind of the spark that helped us to say, look, Muslims, we've done this, and we can do it, and we should be the ones that are kind of putting our word out there. And so that's what we decided to build a library. Right, so we call it Burooj is a nonprofit we've built, and we're basically trying to revive Beit al-Hikmah. Like, that's our ultimate goal. Like, has anyone actually seen like a picture of Baghdad? It's like a circular city, and there's just buildings around. It's so beautiful. You take a look if you can, look on Google, and like right in the center of it was the masajid, and like the Beit al-Hikmah was right in the center. Allahu Akbar, right? And so that's like our goal is, like, what if we can have one in Hayward? We can have one in Pleasanton. We can have it in Milpitas, Fremont, San Jose, San Francisco. That's the goal, is anywhere you go. Obviously, and our thing was, not only do we want Islamic books, that's great, but again, we want people to learn, right? And so we learn from Muslims and non-Muslims both, right? We have a lot to learn from them. And so there's classical books that all of us have read that have inspired us. Like, if I ask everyone in this room, raise your hand and tell me what book is the most inspiring book you've ever read that's not an Islamic book, we all have an answer, all of us, right? Maybe it's To Kill a Mockingbird for someone. Maybe it's Great Gatsby. Maybe, like, these books were, they defined our childhood. They defined kind of who we are sometimes, right? And so the idea is, why don't we create a space where people can come and read, and we can, talk as a community and get together, get to know each other. We can, have coffee, like we have chai. We can have, vendors come in, and we'll have a food truck outside, and we'll have people come in. Or for our children, we can have mommy and me's. We can have, story time, and then, reading to our toddlers and our kids. And then for our sisters and our brothers, we can have monthly book clubs, right, where we can read a book together. Or if you don't want to read, but hey, at least I can spend time with the sisters and learn, or with the brothers, and learn what people are talking about. I see a lot of brothers and sisters doing this kind of naturally, right? Like, if you go to, my friends in Dallas, they started like a fatherly group where they meet every once a month and just talk about, like, oh man, my kids, it's so hard to deal with them. And the sisters did the same thing, mashallah. And so why not do it at a library, right? Like, why not have a dedicated space with dedicated events for it, inshallah, right? And so what we're doing right now is we're actually collecting books for our library. And so we have donations, like there's bins right outside. There's also activities for the kids outside and you can check out some of the books that we've gotten. And if you have suggestions, let us know, please. And we will keep it at MCC East Bay, inshallah. And as it gets full, we'll bring it back. So where we are right now is in Hayward, and we'll be opening multiple locations, inshallah. So that's kind of the idea of what we're trying to do. And then if we want feedback, we need volunteers. We just need people to kind of come and check it out and give us feedback and help us out in any way, or donate books. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, so we're working closely with MCC, mashallah, and may Allah bless them. They've been such an amazing partner for us and been super, super helpful for us. And the idea is, again, like we want to learn from feedback and learn from each other and how we can make it to Beit al-Hikmah. So that's kind of the goal, inshallah. So with that, that's all I had today. If anyone has any questions or thoughts, happy to.
Thank you. Thank you. May Allah bless you for the efforts. Really appreciate that. So I think we're pushing against Maghrib. We have about 8 minutes, inshallah. I see some people from the Mindful Muslim Readers as well here. So I'm very excited to hear questions from them. So I'll bring the mic around, and then we'll take questions. If you have questions online, just type it in the chat box. Any questions for the sister side? Yeah.
I came a few minutes late, but assalamu alaikum. We really, really appreciate your efforts. I think just seeing what's been happening, the things that are coming out of the tragedy in Gaza, the beautiful things that are coming out, these are one of many. Like, it's amazing to see. So we want to be able to support you in any way we can. I don't know if you already went and talked about this, but any of your hiccups that you hit and problems you saw along the way as you were establishing your library, if you could share. Yep. The first one, inshallah.
Inshallah, yeah. Barakallahu fikum, first off, may Allah bless you for all the work that you guys do, mashallah. I think it's great. We definitely need to work together. Vetting books is hard. I mean, I'm sure you guys know better than I do. You guys, I think mindful. For those who don't know, the Mindful Muslim Reader is they're actually going in and reading the books themselves. They're putting reviews in there, so the Muslims are like, is it safe for my child to read or for me to read or not, right? And that's excellent. So we've done a speed version of that, unfortunately. And so what happens is you actually get books that look good on the surface, and then we'll actually have them in the library, and then we'll start reading them, and oh my gosh, there's something in here that's inappropriate, or things that we find uncomfortable as a Muslim, right? So that's been one of the issues, I'd say. In terms of, I think the community support has been overwhelming, alhamdulillah, right? So I think people all know that this is important, something we should be doing. That's probably the main one I get to think of, and like getting the books, right? Sometimes getting the right books has also been a challenge. So those are just basically the main ones, but we want to make it like what do I want to say? I want to make it like a real, like an actual library. I would love to print out cards, give everyone library cards, and actually have them scan. Like I want to do it like the right way, and just because like I think a lot of times what happens is the Muslims will be like, let's make an alternative to something, and we don't have the resources that everyone else does. We don't have government funding and these other things, and so we don't have the way. Like our websites don't look as good as these other websites, and our material doesn't look as good. But we want to change that. We want to actually like. Why can't we make it upscale and nice? And again, we'll keep the cost is a donation. It's not like we're charging $1,000 a month for membership or anything crazy like that. It's more like we can try to build ways to make some money so we can make it in a very positive way, and it's extremely helpful for the community, inshallah.
Are there any other models like Jewish community, Christian community that have done something? I think the Christian bookstores, I've seen them around. Is there any models that we can follow that other faith communities in the United States have done?
Yes, that's a great question. So yeah, definitely Christians have a lot of bookstores, and they're doing a great job. I think so. The Jews, I will say that there's a lot to learn from the Jews, right? They are just doing such, subhanAllah. I mean, hate it or love it, they're just doing amazing work in like almost every subject, right? Like we were talking about with the Jews look at the percentage of Jewish Nobel laureates, right? It's unbelievable, right? And I'm not here to tell you conspiracy or not. I'm just telling you, okay, that's the fact. And so like let's try to model ourselves after that, right? Because they're doing something right. And so actually, if you go to Brooklyn, New York, if you go to the Jews kind of run Brooklyn. For those who've never been there, you just walk through and people are wearing yarmulkes, and like the women are wearing like their traditional dresses, and everything's in Yiddish. Like their buildings are in Yiddish, their buses are in Yiddish, and they have their own libraries in Yiddish and Hebrew. And so they actually have an amazing model, and they don't charge Jews, but they charge everyone, the Gentiles, right? And so, which again, we would never do something like that. But I think their model works really well because they've built it like around their city, right? To me, Brooklyn is kind of like it's a country. It's like its own laws and everything, subhanAllah. And again, I'm not here to bash it. I'm actually here to say, like, why can't we do something like that, right? Like, mashallah, the brothers that are doing in Dallas, like the Epic City, I think that's like a great initiative. May Allah bless them and make it easy for them. I know they're going through some struggle, but like that's the idea. All of us, we're not here to instill it on someone else. We're just here to safeguard ourselves and like make ourselves better, right? And so I think the Jewish community has done an excellent job of saying, hey, look, take it or leave it. This is who we are. right? You know, we're Orthodox Jews, and we read the Torah, the Talmud, and we read it in our circles. If you want to join, you can, but we don't really encourage you. But, so they kind of built it in a way that people around them are okay with it, and everyone just kind of leaves them alone and doesn't bother them. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest ones, like, to learn from, because I think they've done a good job. The Mormons also in Utah also have something similar. They've actually built their waqf, if it's for, again, I don't want to get too into this, but their zakat, so our zakat is 2.5% of our wealth. Their zakat is 10% of their income per year, right? That's their charity that is required upon Mormons, right? And what they do is they've actually built a waqf, an endowment. It's actually one of the biggest hedge funds in the United States by assets under management, because that's how wealthy Mormons are. And they've actually built libraries and built, the Book of Mormon and like other of their books are in there, and they have that in Utah also. So I think they've done also a great job of kind of keeping it like insulated from the community. I think that's, as Muslims, we need to keep ourselves insulated in the same way, inshallah.
Three minutes away from Maghrib. Is there another question? You can answer quickly. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers. Is there an opportunity for government funding for what you're doing? I know, alhamdulillah, you're going after, donations, people helping out, but the future, of growth and sustainability, is there any opportunity on that? Like the public libraries, they're funded by government or taxes.
Yeah, mashallah. No, great question. There's definitely something. I mean, if anyone knows more about this than I do, please let us know. Inshallah, we'd love to talk. Right now, we haven't seen. I mean, as a 501c3, we can like do tax deductible donations and that type of thing. So we're working on that piece of it. There are things like grants and things that we can get, but like to actually have like equivalent to like Pleasanton Library or something like that, or Dublin Library, would be pretty difficult. Especially with kind of the way things are in the United States today, I think it's really hard to go to the government. I feel like I'll get deported if I go, go to them right now, Yeah, so, and I'm born here. I don't know where they're going to deport me to. But again, we would love to, like, there's a lot of ways for, the way they help nonprofits is probably the way we can, to the extent that we can probably get there. But in the future, if there's a way for us to say, like, hey, if we can build it in a way that says, like, it's not a Muslim library, it's just like a ethical library, or it's like a library that's, we're taking away, we're not woke, or whatever you want to say. There may be ways for us to say, like, hey, we can actually, put this into our libraries. One of the brothers at our booth earlier today, he mentioned, like, why don't you take some of the books and put it in, like, the regular libraries? And we would love to do that, but again, one of the issues is we went there and we're like, oh man, sometimes it's nice for us to be there, like especially like in Ramadan, like all the books that we're putting, mashallah, a lot of like the brothers and sisters here are volunteering and putting those books in the library themselves, so those are great. But there are other months that the books are there and they're inappropriate for us, for our children, right? And so it's like, how do you kind of navigate that? We want to, but figuring that out has been kind of tough. But inshallah, again, if anyone has ideas or things, we're always open to hear how we can get that, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. We're a minute away from Maghrib prayer, so I think if you have questions, please talk with the brother and sisters. They have a table on the lobby, and then there's they're collecting books. There's 2 bins out there, so please do donate books to them.
Yeah, so one way actually you can recommend your library to purchase a book, and the books that you have selected, like if we can get like a lot of people from the Muslim community each requesting a book, that is how the public library will represent us more and more.
Inshallah.
And because the amount of tax we pay from the Muslim community to the library is quite huge, but they don't bring equivalent amount of books.
MashaAllah, that's a great idea. It's a fantastic idea. Yeah.
Because in Ohio, one sister did this study and talked to their library, and then they said, okay, tell us what book to bring.
Barakallahu feekum. That's a great idea. I mean, we have a request for books ourselves, like in, I think it's in this link or one of the links. And so if we're the ones that are requesting books all the time, then it's a no-brainer. Like, people look at like incentives, right? If the incentive is that like, hey, we're the ones contributing, we're the ones coming to the library, then they're more likely to change, inshallah. So Jazakallah khairan for that. That's amazing.
Jazakallah khair. So Jazakallah khair, Sidi Arshan. May Allah bless you for your efforts. We'll have azan now for Maghrib prayer. Jazakallah khair.